Well, hey everyone, it's Mark Bayer, and you are tuned to When Science Speaks. Thanks so much for joining us on this episode. It is such a great pleasure to have Mary Woolley and Jenny Luray on the show today. Today's episode actually is sponsored by Bayer Strategic Consulting in Washington, D.C., which helps scientists and engineers get funding, gain influence, and build relationships with the stakeholders who matter the most. I want to start by introducing Mary Woolley. Mary is the president and CEO of Research America, which is the nation's largest nonprofit membership-supported grassroots public education and advocacy organization, committed to making medical and health research a higher national priority. She's served as president and CEO since 1990. Under Mary's leadership, Research America has earned the attention and respect of elected and appointed officials, researchers in the public, private, and academic sectors, media, and community leaders, with a record of innovation and advocacy for research. Mary is an elected member of the National Academy of Medicine and recipient of the Adam Yarmolinsky Medal for distinguished contributions to the mission of the Academy over a significant period. She's also a fellow of the American Association of the Advancement for Science. Mary has a 30-year editorial and publication history on science advocacy and research-related topics. Her op-eds and letters to the editor are published in newspapers and magazines from coast to coast, including the New York Times, the Washington Post, and she's been published in Science, Nature, and many, many other internationally known journals and publications. She's a sought-after speaker, and she's also frequently interviewed by science, news, and policy journalists. She's received recognition by PBS as an unsung heroine. She's a native of Chicago, and Mary received a Bachelor of Science from Stanford University and a Master of Arts from San Francisco State University. It is so wonderful to have her here. She's also joined by Jenny Luray, who is Vice President of Strategy and Communications at Research America. Jenny's a passionate and also expert in building synergies between public and private stakeholders, developing effective advocacy strategies, and creating communications tools to reach concrete improvements in public policy. Jenny served as Chief of Staff to former Senator Barbara Mikulski, Legislative Director for Nita Lowey, and Deputy Assistant to the President in the Clinton White House. Jenny directed U.S. policy and government affairs for BD and Abbott, as well as led the Susan G. Komen Advocacy Alliance as its president. Jenny sits on the governing committee of the FDA-supported NEST-CC and on the advisory council of Brown University's School of Public Health. Jenny earned her BA in sociology from Brown University and her MPA from Harvard's Kennedy School of Government. Jenny and Mary, thank you both so much for being here on this episode.
Happy to be with you, Mark.
Yes, Mark, happy to be here.
So let's start out with this latest news, this recent day one project policy proposal. It's modernizing the relationship between scientists and the public, which you wrote with Dr. Sarah Ackerman, who's a science policy fellow at Research America. As you point out in the proposal, the pandemic has really pushed science to the forefront of public attention, creating for both scientists and also many swaths of the American public unprecedented levels of interaction, whether that's in person, in the media, or online. Why do you think it's taken such a catastrophic event for sustained encounters between scientists and the public, particularly since so much of scientific research, as you know, is publicly funded, and scientific breakthroughs have such a major impact on society?
Well, Mark, it's an excellent question. I would say that it's just a part of the long-standing culture of science to take the public for granted, if you will, and vice versa. It's a two-way street, so that scientists aren't trained or encouraged, for the most part, to engage with the public. So it just isn't a day-to-day activity or one that is recognized by scientific peers or mentors or institutions. So what we were trying to do in this concept paper for day one is to shake up that longstanding tradition, and for all the best reasons, to make sure that science has a continued chance to serve the public's interest. Change the system, change the culture of science so that a built-in program of understanding the context, the historical, the societal, the ethical, the political, small p, context of science is just becomes as routine to a scientist as pipetting or strong statistics. This is something that we see as just around the corner that young scientists are eager for, in fact. So we're at a tipping point, and one of the silver linings, if you will, if there can be such a thing, to the pandemic is that it's speeding the day that we are going to be modernizing the relationship between science and the public.
Thanks so much. That's so important and so right on target. Your work is on this concept proposal is really happening at such the perfect moment. I want to also, ask you, understanding that there are many variables here, how do you feel this overall lack of familiarity has impacted the level of adherence, say, to public health measures for containing the spread of the virus, which of course are grounded in scientific evidence, such as wearing a mask and social distancing?
Yeah, Mark, I can take that. Well, first, I think it's highlighted how important it is for the public to better understand the scientific process, the inherent uncertainty involved in science, how information evolves, and how that is inevitably going to change recommendations. The science community needs to be as transparent as possible when we don't know all the answers. But our recent survey showed enormous bipartisan support for scientists. So I don't think the issue is the scientist as messenger, but really the messaging itself. And also, I think we need to be clear that the recommendations coming from the public health community and other scientists have been continuously undercut by certain political leaders and really dragged into an unfortunate, deep political divide in this country.
Yeah, and thank you so much, Jenny, for making the distinction between the message and the messenger. That is so important. In this concept paper, you are proposing a public engagement training system for STEM PhDs that would include instruction and effective communications with general audiences and policymakers, for example. I'd love for you to share more about the concept proposal, maybe some other components of the PE training that you're thinking about that are just so important, particularly at this moment.
Sure. Well, I'll say a few words, and Jenny might chime in as well.
Great.
Part of modernizing the communication between the connection between science and the public right now, these days, involves social media, which the science community is not arguably as fluent in as much of the rest of society. So learning more about how to engage the public in ways beyond posting your paper, if you will, but to really meet people, where they are. And meeting people where they are is about winning hearts before minds. And this isn't something that is some secret sauce that is only for special people who know how to do it. It's just realizing that being in the science community doesn't mean you're letting go of the rest of your life and the way you emotionally connect to others, whether they're in your family or among your friends or general public, people you meet for the first time. So, sometimes it's missed by scientists that they can be rigorous in their science, but emotional, show some passion when they're talking about it. But those aren't, counter propositions. They actually can bolster each other. And it goes back, I know I said this earlier, to, just being connected to that context that science exists in. And that is not a world of strangers, but rather people who aren't trained as scientists are, but want to know, even, now maybe more than ever. And this, which I think is summed up in the one word, skepticism. So scientists are sometimes skeptical of the public. And they say, oh, you're being skeptical here if you don't understand what I'm talking about, and implying that that's not okay. But actually, scientists are trained to be skeptical. It's a good thing. When someone who is doesn't have the benefit of all that scientific training says or is basically conveying that they're skeptical, that should be the kind of thing we want to teach scientists to do, is to embrace that, run toward that and say, you sound skeptical. That's the way I was trained. We have this in common. It's good to ask questions. It's good to ask questions, in the moment. Ask questions about vaccines. Do they work? How do they work? Help me understand. People want to know more, and being trained in communicating more effectively as a two-way street, as a good listener with some humility, is within our grasp. We know how to do it. We just need to embrace it.
Jenny, did you want to add any comments to Mary's?
Well, it's so beautifully said.
Right.
I'll just say that, there has been a lot of work done on how to communicate science effectively. So, we're not starting from scratch here. There are a lot of tools, and we just think they really need to be much better disseminated, and really starting off scientists understanding those skills and really seeing them as part of their really part of their professional life.
So important. Thank you both. Mary, when you were emphasizing connection, emotion, that kind of asking questions, and even skepticism, like you pointed out, it's interesting in the context of a professional environment that the scientist is taught to be skeptical and welcome that and respond to questions, but then maybe with the general audience is a different reaction. So using a lot of these tools that they already have, but maybe reorienting them a little bit for a new environment, which is more public facing. Just great. Thank you for that.
Well
And
said.
you and this really goes to what you were saying, Mary, and Jenny as well earlier, there's a real hunger. You reference this real hunger and interest for this training. It's not just that this is being, created as just another program that should be out there, but there is a very strong demand, from STEM PhDs. And my own firsthand experience, of working with these folks really, validates what I'm seeing, as well. And in addition to applying in the university environment, the types of skills you propose as part of the PE training, how do you envision them as having a lot of impact and being applicable more broadly and more transferably in types of jobs that are outside of academia as well?
Well, there's lots of possibilities there, Mark. One thing I would just say before I toss the ball here to Jenny is that training in and ultimately a level of comfort in communicating works for everybody on a lifetime basis. And there's ways that it helps you be a good citizen too. So one of the little tests that I sometimes like to throw out there for the science community to help them realize how invisible really they are to the broad public is a little thing I call the Starbucks test. So let's assume you're in a local coffee emporia or standing outside these days for your order, appropriately physically distanced, but your member of Congress is there as well. Same errand, we all love our coffee or equivalent. So the question is to raise your hand if you recognize that individual on site. And in a science audience, maybe 10% or so will say yes, they recognize their member of Congress. Senators are a little easier, actually. People kind of have more of a mental picture. Your member of Congress. Okay. So the second question is raise your hand if your member of Congress recognizes you. I can tell you it's very rare, especially in academic science audience, that there'll be more than one, maybe 1, 2 hands. And that's a problem. That illustrates the political, small p, but the civic political sense, the invisibility of individuals in the science community. Yes, there's a university. Yes, there's an academic medical center. Yes, there's the NIH and Bethesda, et cetera. Those are buildings and institutions, and people more or less know what happens there, but i.e. research, but they don't know who is in those buildings. And this can be true even in one's own family. And that's one of the things that we want to help the science community get past, so that they're comfortable and are putting a human face, their own face, on science for people to query if they've got questions, or just get to know. Can feel that, okay, I get it, you're working for me. And that's really what people ought to be saying too. When someone asks, okay, so what do you do after you come up to your member of Congress safely,
right,
masks, the whole bit, and say, thank you for public service. Thank you for what you're doing. Even if you don't agree with everything they do, it's appropriate to say thank you. And then they're going to ask you, well, thank you very much. What do you do?
right.
And the scientist should say, I also serve the public's interest. Let me tell you how. And
Love it.
we'll develop a relationship which can be good for science, and it's good for our communities, most importantly.
Right. So beautiful. And also thank you for that vivid picture that you painted, Mary. Jenny, would you like to add anything to Mary's comments?
I would say that, we would be delighted if people taking the PE course stayed in the lab and focused on discoveries for the rest of their careers, but knowing that this helps to break the wall between the lab and the public. But at the same time, we know that as people become exposed to some of these ideas, public policy, communications, they may see some opportunities outside of academic science. And we know that there's an enormous need for science in the policy world. From the FDA is always looking for scientists. That's just one of many regulatory agencies that, really relies on cutting edge scientists to really, keep our food, our medicine, our cosmetics safe. And of course, addressing climate change. The list is really endless. So, there will be opportunities, I think, to be exposed to, other career tracks.
Mhm.
And, one thing I want to mention is that one of the ways we know about support for this course is we've had, for 2 years, we've been running a microgrant program for PhD and postdoc students. And we've had enormous interest, really double the applications that we've been able to fund. We've just launched our 3rd year. And I would love for anyone listening who's a science grad student or postdoc or knows of any and want to dialogue with their local communities, please go on our site, researchamerica.org, for more information about this year's microgrant. We've seen some really creative projects come out, from podcasts, to virtual poster sessions, sessions with city council people over beer. That was before the, obviously the pandemic, but just some really terrific dialogue that is, leading to these young scientists really being able to, leverage their expertise on behalf of their communities.
Yeah, that is such a great program. And actually, I tweeted about it yesterday. So
great.
with a link to your page, because I think it's just fantastic. And I looked at all the different categories that people could put together, and just really going to make, such a difference as far as, the relatability and using these different media to reach out. Say, I did a talk a couple of years ago at UNC Chapel Hill, and somebody, one of the PhDs, raised his hand during the Q&A and said, I only have an hour a week to dedicate to talking to my local congressional office. Like, that's not enough, not nearly enough. And I said, if you devote an hour a week or even 15 minutes a week to doing that, you are going to be in the upper 0.5% of constituents in that district that actually is checking in. And when you see your congressperson at the Starbucks, he or she is going to recognize you. Based on that, because, it doesn't take a tremendous amount of time. And, these folks are, as you know, really, really busy. I mean, the scientists and the researchers. So it doesn't take much to really raise your profile and get your voice heard.
Agreed.
I'd like to now just kind of more broadly ask you about Research America's work and priorities. The response to COVID-19, clearly an historic example of the value of public-private partnerships, whether it's about PPE or vaccine development, other critical needs to respond to the pandemic. And I know listeners would really be interested for you to share your perspectives, both on these kind of partnerships historically, but also how policymakers perhaps should improve their approach in this area in the future, or just, what Research America, in addition to these micro grants, kind of what is really a focus at this point?
Well, Mary, I'll kick this off. I mean, obviously, COVID-19, I should say, obviously, if you follow the R&D involved in COVID-19 has led to a number of trailblazing public-private partnerships. There's some well-publicized ones emanating from NIH, like Operation Warp Speed and Active, but also some less well-known efforts that are really worth mentioning. For example, NCATS, which is the National Center for Translational Research at NIH, is supporting several projects to enable the sharing of data across platforms, across academic platforms, industry platforms, which has really helped to speed up clinical trials for COVID-19, and obviously can be applied for other diseases. And we are seeing partnerships sprout up in cancer, some very forward-looking partnerships. So there's no question that I think the sky is the limit here. And I think that we've seen just a lot of really robust communication between government and industry. And if you talk to folks on the industry side, they say the communication piece is what's key, is getting the information. It's that flow of information back and forth, whether it's NIH or the FDA, because time is money. Time is certainly health in this case of COVID-19, but we hear just a lot of praise of public officials by our industry partners in terms of how responsive and communicative the government folks they're working with have been.
And Mark, I just might add to what Jenny was saying, because you were gracious enough to set that up as a focused on Research America a little bit. And I just say that, when we were founded now almost 32 years ago, the concept was quite novel, and it's still rare, as a matter of fact, of putting together an alliance across the stakeholders in research for health. And so that means industry, it means academia and independent research institutes, it means patient groups, and it means scientific professional societies. So when in our work as advocates to help make research for health a much higher national priority, we're always thinking of each of those sectors and in what ways they can be more effective in partnership. So we do a lot of convening, definitely a lot of listening, and a lot of, if you will, matchmaking to assure that we can speed the day that research is going to pay off for health. And in recent years, we've also made a really strong concerted effort to be connected to the broad science community in addition, because science is converging more and more by the moment. It's always been actually connected in ways, physical sciences, biological sciences, social sciences. It's always been connected in ways that don't necessarily meet the eye, but these days it's just in hyperdrive as a connected enterprise. And we've got to all be working together, standing shoulder to shoulder as advocates and shoulder to shoulder in in assuring that we're going to remain globally competitive. We're going to assure better health, prosperity, and a secure environment for all of us, and effective as a leader in the world.
So well said, both of you. And those will be the last words of the show. There's nothing more to add. But I will say that Research America is such a leading, important, vital organization, bringing together all of those stakeholders. So I wanted to start by thanking both of you for what you do every day. It is so critical to our entire country and all of our folks here. So thank you, thank you for that. And I would encourage listeners, Research America is pulling together all of these various stakeholders that could be, really interesting places for you to think about for your careers if you're going to be moving outside of academia, or maybe even getting involved while you're in the university environment. So we'll have a lot of information in the show notes about the micro grants and programs that Research America has working. Mary and Jenny, thank you both so much, so much for being on the show.
You're welcome, Mark. It's been a lot of fun. Thanks.
And listeners, thanks to you for being here on this episode of When Science Speaks. And I hope you'll be back next time for the next episode of When Science Speaks.